I wasn't supposed to see it. I wasn't supposed to know. But sometimes, life throws you into places you'd rather not be. And this was one of those moments. It was late. Laura was in the shower, the sound of water drowning out the world. I had come home from work, exhausted, same as every other day, but something was different. Her phone was sitting there on the kitchen counter, a screen lit up, a message from someone named Jackson. I didn't think much of it at first, but something inside me shifted when I noticed the way her phone buzzed every few seconds. A rhythm, a conversation, a little too lively for this time of night. I knew Jackson. He was our trainer at the gym. Tall, fit, and always wearing that annoyingly perfect smile. Everyone liked him, especially Laura, or so I thought. We trained together, and sometimes I'd see her talking to him more than anyone else. But I never really let it bother me. At least, not until now. I picked up her phone. I shouldn't have, I know that. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. I swiped up, and the conversation opened like a door I wasn't ready to walk through. The messages weren't just friendly. They were flirtatious and intimate. Things he had no right saying to my wife, and things she had no right saying back. My heart raced, and my hands started to shake. It felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling. "Missed you today. Same time tomorrow?" he wrote. And she replied with a smiley face, a winking one at that. I wanted to scream, to throw her phone against the wall. But I didn't. Something in me, something cold and calculated, kept me still. I couldn't confront her yet. Not without more. I needed to be sure. I needed a plan. Over the next few days, I watched her. Every move, every glance, every excuse to stay a little longer at the gym. It all added up, like pieces of a twisted puzzle I never asked to solve. She was seeing him. It wasn't just some harmless flirtation. I could feel it. It burned inside me, a flame that refused to go out. But I wasn't going to lose control. I wouldn't confront them like a jealous fool. No, I was going to make sure they both paid for this. I wanted to ruin them, slowly, carefully, and publicly. And I knew just how to do it. That's how I ended up at the gym that day, playing the role of the good husband, the clueless one. I saw them talking, laughing near the weights. It made me sick, but I held it in. I walked over, calm and collected. "Hey, Jackson, can we talk for a second?" I asked, my voice steady. Laura's eyes widened, and I could see the slight panic in her expression. But Jackson? He was all confidence, that smug smile never leaving his face. "Sure thing, man. What's up?" We stepped away, out of earshot, but not too far. I wanted people to notice. "I've been thinking," I started, keeping my tone low but pointed, "your training methods are a bit aggressive, don't you think? You're pushing some clients too hard. My wife, for example." His face twisted for a moment, surprised by my tone. "What do you mean?" "Laura's been making great progress." "Progress?" I snapped, raising my voice just enough. "She's been injured because of you. You've been reckless." Now I had his full attention. His arrogance turned to defensiveness, and before I knew it, we were chest to chest, his fists clenched. That's when I made my move. I shoved him, just hard enough to provoke him. And, as I'd hoped, he snapped. His fist came flying, landing square on my jaw. The gym erupted. People turned, phones came out, and within seconds, Jackson was the villain of the scene. I staggered back, holding my face, playing the victim perfectly. The gym manager came rushing over, separating us as Jackson tried to defend himself, but it was too late. Everyone had seen enough. I walked away that day bruised but victorious. By the next morning, Jackson was fired, and his reputation was shattered. Laura? She didn't know what to do. She defended him at first, but once I showed everyone the messages, once her friends started talking, it all fell apart. She became the center of gossip, her name dragged through the mud. And I watched it all unfold with cold satisfaction. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about making them both feel the weight of their betrayal. This was only the beginning. The fallout from that day at the gym was swift and brutal. Jackson was gone, his locker emptied, his name scrubbed from the training schedule like he had never existed. Word spread quickly. He was the man who couldn't control his temper, the trainer who'd attacked a client. No one cared to hear his side of the story. I had made sure of that. Laura didn't speak much the day after. She could feel the tension building, but I wasn't ready to have that conversation just yet. I wanted her to squirm. I wanted her to feel the weight of her choices, but I wasn't done. Not even close. A week passed, and the silence between us grew thicker. She was distant, staying late at work more often, and avoiding eye contact when we were at home together. She didn't mention Jackson, but I knew it was tearing her up inside. I could see it in her eyes every time her phone buzzed, and she looked at it with hesitation. I waited. I bided my time, collecting every piece of evidence I needed, reading every message she sent to him while pretending not to notice the slow unraveling of our marriage. Then, one evening, I decided it was time to make the next move. We were sitting at the dinner table, a quiet meal of leftover takeout between us. Laura's fork barely moved, she was lost in her own thoughts. I finally broke the silence. "So, I talked to some people at the gym today," I said casually, watching her reaction out of the corner of my eye. Her hand froze mid-air, but she didn't look up. "What about?" she asked, her voice tight. "Oh, just the usual. You know, the whole situation with Jackson." I paused, letting the tension build. Turns out, people have been talking about what happened. And not just about him. She looked up then, her eyes sharp with suspicion. "What do you mean?" I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "I mean, people are wondering why you were so close to him in the first place. Why did you defend him so quickly after the fight? They're starting to connect the dots. Laura. And it doesn't look good." Her face paled. I could see the panic rising in her chest. She stammered, "That's ridiculous. I defended him because what you did was." "Because what I did?" I interrupted, my voice suddenly cold. "What I did was show everyone who he really is. What you did, Laura, was betray me. And people are starting to notice." She looked like she had been punched in the gut. "Betray you? What are you talking about?" I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and placed it on the table between us. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. I've seen the messages. Every single one of them." For a moment, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the refrigerator. Laura stared at the phone, her face a mask of disbelief and terror. She didn't try to deny it. She knew she couldn't. I didn't," she began, but her voice faltered. She knew there was no way to talk her way out of this. "It wasn't what you think. Wasn't it?" I snapped, the anger finally bubbling to the surface. "You've been lying to me for weeks, Laura. Weeks. And now you expect me to believe it wasn't what I think it was? You've been sneaking around with him, sending him those messages, meeting him behind my back. You betrayed me. And now, you're going to pay for it." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't care. The time for sympathy had long passed. This was about more than just her and Jackson now. This was about showing her what happens when you cross the line, when you destroy the life we built together. I stood up from the table, my voice cold and steady. "I've already told a few people. Your friends. They deserve to know what kind of person you are, don't you think?" She gasped, standing up suddenly, her hands shaking. "You told my friends? What the hell is wrong with you, Mark?" "Wrong with me?" I laughed, the sound hollow. "You think I'm the problem here? You're the one who chose him. You're the one who threw away everything we had." Tears rolled down her cheeks as she tried to hold herself together. "Mark, please. I made a mistake. It didn't mean anything. I'll fix this. I'll stop talking to him. Just, don't do this." But it was too late for that. The damage was already done. I had waited too long, collected too much evidence, and the wheels were already in motion. Laura's betrayal wasn't just going to cost her her marriage. It was going to cost her reputation, her friendships, and her place in the world we shared. "You don't get it, do you?" I said, my voice low and dangerous. "This isn't about you fixing anything. This is about you facing the consequences. You're not just losing me, Laura. You're losing everything." I left the table and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, broken. I could hear her sobs echoing through the house, but they didn't move me. Not anymore. As I headed upstairs, I could only think of one thing: this was only the second act. There was still more to come, more pain for her to endure. And I would watch every moment of it unfold. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about making sure she understood exactly what she had done, and that there was no going back. The days that followed were like watching a slow-motion car crash. Laura's world started to crumble, one piece at a time, and I made sure to stay in the driver's seat. It started small. Whispers at the gym when she walked in, the way people avoided her eyes. A few of her friends stopped returning her calls. She'd come home tense, quieter than usual. Her usual confidence was slipping, and it didn't take long before she realized why. I had spoken to 3 of her closest friends, Megan, Jessica, and Katie. Over a casual coffee, I had shown them the messages between Laura and Jackson, playing the role of the heartbroken husband, betrayed and lost. It wasn't hard to get them on my side. People love drama, especially when it's someone else's life unraveling in front of them. I don't know what to do anymore, I had said to them, carefully hiding my satisfaction behind a mask of sorrow. I loved her, but I can't believe she'd do this to me. And with him of all people. Megan gasped, her eyes wide. I never thought Laura would do something like that. Jessica had shaken her head, disbelief written all over her face. She always seemed so together. Katie had been the most shocked, her face pale as she stared at the messages. Mark, I'm so sorry. I can't even imagine how you're feeling. They ate it up, every word, and just like that, the seeds of doubt were planted. I knew that by the time they left that cafe, the gossip would spread like wildfire. They wouldn't be able to help themselves. And that's exactly what I wanted. The next day, Laura came home from work looking shaken. She slammed her bag down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment, her back to me, breathing heavily. What happened? I asked, barely containing the smirk tugging at my lips. She turned to face me, her eyes full of anger and fear. Did you tell them? Megan? Jessica? Katie? Did you tell them about Jackson and me? I leaned back in my chair, feigning confusion. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, Mark. She shouted, her voice cracking. They all know. Everyone's been avoiding me at work. They're talking behind my back. Megan wouldn't even look at me today. I stood up slowly, walking over to her. What did you expect, Laura? Did you really think I was just going to sit back and let you destroy everything we had without any consequences? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I wasn't stopping now. You made your choice, I continued, my voice low and steady. You chose him. You threw away our life for some cheap fling, and now you're paying the price. You don't get to play the victim here. She collapsed into a chair, her face buried in her hands. I never wanted this. I never thought it would get this far. Well, it has, I said coldly. And it's not over yet. I left her there, sobbing into her hands, the weight of her decisions finally crashing down on her. This was exactly what I had planned, and it was working perfectly. She was unraveling, piece by piece, and I wasn't finished with her yet. Laura wasn't the only one feeling the heat. Jackson, the golden boy of the gym, was starting to see the other side of his popularity. After the incident, people began to distance themselves from him, unsure of what to believe. I made sure that the narrative stayed in my favor. All I had to do was drop a few well-placed comments, hinting that Jackson had a history of crossing lines with clients. It didn't take much. People love a scandal. I even heard that he was having trouble finding new work. No one wanted to hire a trainer with a reputation for violence and inappropriate relationships. Perfect. I still saw him around town occasionally, but he never looked me in the eye. He knew better than to confront me, not after what happened. But I wasn't done with him either. He had taken something from me, and I wasn't about to let him walk away unscathed. One afternoon, I decided to take things a step further. I knew Jackson frequented a local bar after work, a place where a lot of people from the gym hung out. I showed up one evening, just as he was sitting down with a few acquaintances. He didn't see me at first, and I made sure to position myself close enough to overhear their conversation. I'm telling you, man, it wasn't like that, Jackson was saying, his voice low and tense. Mark set me up. He's been spreading lies ever since. One of the guys sitting with him shook his head. Doesn't matter. Bro, people don't trust you anymore. No one wants to be associated with a guy who's got a reputation for, you know. I didn't sleep with her, Jackson snapped, clearly frustrated. It was just flirting. It never went that far. Doesn't make a difference, the other guy muttered. You're toxic now. I took that as my cue. I stood up, making sure Jackson saw me, and walked over to the table. His eyes widened, and his face went pale. The guys sitting with him shifted uncomfortably, clearly not wanting to get involved. Funny seeing you here, Jackson, I said, my tone calm but laced with menace. Jackson stared at me, his jaw clenched. What do you want, Mark? I smiled. Just wanted to make sure you're doing okay. Seems like things haven't been going so well for you lately. He stood up, towering over me, but I didn't flinch. You ruined my life, he hissed, his voice low enough that only I could hear. You think you can just walk away from this? I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't ruin your life. Jackson, you did. I just gave everyone else a reason to see it. His fists clenched at his sides, but he didn't move. He knew better than to start something in public again. I had already taken him down once, and he wasn't about to give me a second chance. Stay away from me, he growled, turning and storming out of the bar. The guys at the table looked at me, then at each other, before quickly finishing their drinks and leaving as well. I stood there for a moment, watching him go, satisfaction coursing through me. Jackson was finished. His career, his reputation, everything he had worked for, it was all gone. And Laura? She was next. It had been 2 weeks since the fallout, and Laura was a shell of her former self. Her once confident stride was replaced with hesitant, tentative steps. She had stopped going to the gym entirely, too embarrassed to face the whispers and sidelong glances that greeted her every time she walked in. Her friends, the ones she thought would always be there, had slowly begun to distance themselves. One by one, Megan had stopped texting. Jessica suddenly had plans whenever Laura reached out. Katie, the closest of them all, avoided her completely. Laura was unraveling. I could see it in every look she gave me, desperate and pleading like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. But I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction of knowing how far my plan had really gone. Not yet. One evening, as we sat in silence, her barely touched dinner growing cold on the table, she finally broke. "Mark," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I can't do this anymore." I looked up from my plate, pretending not to understand. "Do what?" "Live like this," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "Everyone's talking about me. My friends won't even look at me. You barely talk to me." She choked back a sob. "I don't know how to fix this." I set my fork down slowly, taking my time before responding. I wanted her to feel every second of the tension between us. "You want to fix this?" I asked, my voice cold. "How do you plan on doing that, Laura? Do you think you can just erase what you did? You think you can make everyone forget how you threw away our marriage for some guy who doesn't even care about you?" She flinched, her face crumpling. "It wasn't like that. I made a mistake, but it wasn't about Jackson. It was about me. I was feeling lost, and I let things get out of control. But I love you, Mark. I love us. I never wanted this to happen." I stood up, walking slowly around the table until I was standing behind her. I could see her shoulders shaking, and her hands trembling as she stared at the table in front of her. For a moment, I let the silence stretch, the weight of my presence pressing down on her. "You're right about one thing," I said quietly. "This is all your fault. You let things get out of control. You destroyed everything we had. But here's the thing, Laura. I don't love you anymore. Not after what you did." She gasped, turning to face me, her eyes wide with shock. "Mark, no, please. I'll do anything. Just give me a chance to make this right." But I wasn't done yet. "I've already told your friends. They know what you did. They know the truth. And soon, everyone else will too." Her face went pale, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "What do you mean? You can't." "I can," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "And I will. You don't get to walk away from this without facing the consequences, Laura. This isn't just about us. This is about showing you, and everyone else, what happens when you betray someone like that." Her eyes filled with terror as the full weight of my words sank in. "Mark, please. I'm begging you." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sitting there, broken and defeated. I knew it was time for the final phase of my plan when Laura came home from work one evening looking more exhausted and defeated than ever. She had been avoiding social gatherings, skipping nights out with her remaining acquaintances, and even working late just to stay away from the house. The silence between us had grown so thick, it was almost suffocating. But the silence wasn't enough for me. I needed to see her completely undone. That night, after she had gone to bed, I reached for my phone. I had collected every message, every damning piece of evidence, and I knew exactly where to send it. The town gossip forums were perfect. They were anonymous, but everyone important still read them. All it took was a few posts from a concerned husband about the affair between Jackson and my wife, along with screenshots of their flirtatious conversations. Once the posts were live, the wheels were set in motion. The next morning, the storm hit. I was sitting at the kitchen table, drinking my coffee, when Laura's phone began to buzz uncontrollably. Message after message poured in, each one making her face grow paler by the second. I could see her hands shaking as she tried to read them, but it was clear, she knew something was horribly wrong. "Mark," she started, her voice barely a whisper. But I cut her off. "Let me guess," I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "Everyone knows now." Her eyes filled with panic as she tried to process what was happening. "What did you do?" I smiled, setting my mug down. "I told them the truth, Laura. I told them what kind of person you really are." She stood frozen, her eyes wide with shock. "You didn't." "I did," I replied calmly. "And now everyone knows. They know what you did. They know who you are." Her phone buzzed again, and she finally looked at the screen. I could see the horror in her expression as she scrolled through the messages, the gossip spreading like wildfire through her social circle. Friends, co-workers, acquaintances, everyone was talking about her. The affair was no longer a secret, it was public, out there for the world to see. "I'm ruined," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You've ruined me." I stood up, walking over to her, looking down at the woman who had once been so sure of herself. Now she was nothing but a wreck, crumbling under the weight of her own decisions. "No, Laura," I said, my voice cold. "You ruined yourself. I just made sure everyone else saw it." She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, her body shaking with every breath. The woman who had once stood so tall, so proud, was now broken beyond repair. And I stood over her, feeling nothing but satisfaction. My revenge was complete. There was no going back now. The damage was done. Laura had lost everything, her reputation, her friendships, her place in the world. And I had watched it all unfold exactly as I had planned. This wasn't just about betrayal. It was about making sure she understood that actions have consequences, and those consequences had destroyed her life. As I left the house that morning, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The days that followed were eerily quiet. Laura barely spoke, barely moved, as if the life had been drained out of her. I would come home to find her sitting in the same spot on the couch, staring blankly at the television, which was usually off. The woman I once knew, the woman who had betrayed me, was gone. In her place was a hollow shell, broken beyond recognition. Part of me had expected this moment to feel more satisfying. I had spent weeks meticulously crafting her downfall, watching as she lost everything, her friends, her reputation, her dignity. And yet, as I stood in the quiet of our house, I couldn't shake the strange sense of emptiness that had settled in my chest. It was as if, now that my revenge was complete, there was nothing left for me to feel. One night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard her crying in the other room. It wasn't the loud, desperate sobs that had echoed through the house before. This time, the sound was quiet, barely audible, like she didn't even have the energy to cry anymore. I listened for a while, unmoving, my mind turning over everything that had happened. I had gotten what I wanted, complete and total revenge. Jackson was gone, his career destroyed. Laura was a pariah, hated by the very people who had once loved her. I had won, but for the first time since it all began, I wasn't sure what victory felt like anymore. The next morning, Laura didn't get out of bed. I didn't bother asking her why. I knew she wasn't going to work. How could she, after what I had done? Everyone there knew. They had seen the messages and heard the rumors. Her professional life had crumbled just like the rest of her world. I poured myself a cup of coffee, glancing at the empty chair across from me. The kitchen felt cold, even though the sunlight was streaming through the window. Everything felt colder now, even the house. I hadn't expected the silence to feel so suffocating. As I sat there, I thought about what came next. What would happen now that I had everything I had wanted? The revenge was over, but the reality of our destroyed marriage was still here. I wasn't sure what to do with that thought. I got up and left the house without saying a word to her. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I didn't know how to fill the silence anymore. It was a Wednesday when everything truly came crashing down. I had just come back from the gym, my new gym, the one where Jackson had never worked. It had been weeks since I'd seen him, and I knew he had moved to a different town, far from the mess I had made of his life. I didn't care where he had gone. As far as I was concerned, he was just a footnote in the story of my revenge. But as I walked into the house, something felt different. The usual heavy silence was still there, but it was off. I couldn't explain it, but something was wrong. The air felt heavier, almost like it was pressing down on me. "Laura?" I called, my voice echoing through the empty rooms. No answer. I walked through the house, checking each room, but she was nowhere to be found. The bedroom was empty, the living room untouched. The house looked the same as always, but it felt abandoned. Like she had been gone for a long time. Even though I had seen her that morning. It wasn't until I reached the kitchen that I saw the note. It was lying on the counter, folded neatly, with my name written on the front in her delicate handwriting. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up, my heart pounding in my chest. Something told me that whatever was in that note was the end of everything. I unfolded it slowly, my hands shaking slightly as I read the words. Mark, I can't do this anymore. I can't live with the weight of what I did to you. And I can't live in the shadow of what you've done to me. I know I made a terrible mistake, but the punishment you've put me through. I don't know how to survive it anymore. I've lost everything. My friends, my career, my dignity. And I know I deserve it. I know I deserve to be hated for what I did to us. But I can't take it anymore. I've tried to hold on, tried to find a way to make things right, but there's nothing left. You were right. I destroyed us. And now, I don't know how to go on. I'm leaving. I don't know where I'm going, but I can't stay here, in this house, with everything we've built that's now falling apart. I hope one day you'll find a way to forgive me. But even if you can't, I hope you can find some peace. I'm sorry. Laura. I stood there, staring at the note in my hands, the words blurring in front of my eyes. She was gone. For a long time, I didn't move. I just stood there, the weight of everything crashing down on me. The victory I had fought so hard for now felt hollow. Meaningless. The house was empty, and so was I. I had won, but in the end, I had lost everything that mattered. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually, I folded the note and set it back on the counter. The silence that followed was deafening, and for the first time since this all began, I felt the full weight of what I had done. Laura was gone, and there was no coming back from that. I had gotten my revenge. But at what cost? The days after Laura left were a blur. I don't know if it was the shock of her absence or the sudden, crushing weight of the silence that fell over the house, but everything felt surreal. I had wanted her gone, hadn't I? I had planned for this. Wanted her to feel the full weight of her betrayal until there was nothing left of the woman who had destroyed our marriage. But now, with her actually gone, I felt nothing. Or maybe it was something worse. The victory I had craved, the revenge I had worked so hard to get, now felt like an anchor pulling me down. I sat in the empty house, surrounded by the reminders of the life we once had. The photos on the walls, the furniture we had picked out together, all of it mocked me now. Everything I had worked for, every moment I had spent plotting, had led to this. The house was mine, my life was mine, but none of it mattered anymore. Laura was gone, and I was alone. I didn't hear from her. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was as if she had disappeared completely. At first, I was glad. It was easier this way, I told myself. I didn't have to face her, didn't have to deal with the mess we had created. But as the days turned into weeks, the silence began to gnaw at me. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself scrolling through old messages on my phone. Photos of us, smiling and happy, before everything had gone wrong. There were messages from the early days of our relationship, full of love and hope for the future. I read through them, feeling the weight of each word like a punch to the gut. What had happened to us? I had been so focused on my revenge, so consumed by the betrayal, that I had forgotten what we had once been. I had forgotten the good times, the moments when we had been happy. It all seemed so far away now, buried under the rubble of everything I had destroyed. I couldn't shake the feeling that, in the end, I had become something worse than what I had hated in Laura. Yes, she had betrayed me. Yes, she had hurt me in ways I hadn't thought possible. But what I had done in return, systematically tearing her life apart, making sure she felt every ounce of pain I had, was something darker. Something I wasn't sure I could live with anymore. A few days later, I finally broke. I couldn't stand the silence, couldn't stand the weight of what I had done pressing down on me anymore. I needed to see her, to talk to her, to understand why she had left. Maybe it was too late to fix anything, but I needed closure. I needed to face the mess I had made. I called every number I had for her. Nothing. I drove to the places she used to go, her favorite cafe, the park where she used to run. But there was no sign of her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The only thing I had left was the note she had written me, now crumpled from the number of times I had read it. I had thought I could let her go. I had thought my revenge would be enough to move on. But now, I wasn't so sure. After nearly a week of searching, I finally tracked her down. She was staying at a small, rundown apartment across town, far from the life we had built together. I don't know how long I stood outside her door, working up the courage to knock, but eventually, I forced myself to do it. The door opened slowly, and there she was, Laura, looking tired, worn, and smaller than I remembered. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at each other, neither of us knowing what to say. "What are you doing here, Mark?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I admitted, and it was the truth. I didn't know why I was there and didn't know what I hoped to accomplish. I needed to see you." She let out a bitter laugh. "Why? To make sure I'm as miserable as you wanted me to be? To check if your plan worked?" I winced, the truth of her words hitting harder than I expected. "I didn't." "Didn't what?" she interrupted, her voice rising. "Didn't want this? You wanted this, Mark. You wanted to destroy me, and you did. Congratulations. You won." Her words stung, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of what I had done. She was right. I had wanted this. I had wanted her to feel every ounce of pain I had felt. And I had succeeded. But now, standing in front of her, all I could feel was regret. "I didn't want it to end like this," I said quietly, my voice faltering. "Then what did you want?" she asked, her eyes filled with tears. "What did you think would happen? That I would just break down and beg for your forgiveness? That I would come crawling back, and we could somehow fix this?" I didn't have an answer. I had been so consumed by revenge that I hadn't thought about what came after. I hadn't considered what would happen once I had gotten what I wanted. Laura shook her head, wiping away the tears that had started to fall. "There's nothing left, Mark. You made sure of that. We can't go back. We can't fix this." I nodded, knowing she was right. There was no going back from what I had done. The life we had shared, the love we had once had, was gone, and it was my fault. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words feeling hollow even as I said them. She looked at me for a long time, her expression unreadable. "It's too late for sorry." And with that, she closed the door. I stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, the finality of it sinking in. There was no fixing this. There was no going back. I had destroyed everything, and now, I was left with the ashes. As I walked away, the weight of my victory pressed down on me harder than ever before. I had won, but in the end, it felt like the greatest loss of my life. Weeks passed, but the weight of everything I had done clung to me like a shadow. I had thought I would feel free after Laura was gone. That her absence would allow me to move on, to start fresh. But instead, the guilt and emptiness settled in, deeper than I ever imagined. I had gotten everything I wanted: revenge, vindication, the end of her lies. Yet, with every passing day, I realized I had lost more than I'd ever anticipated. The house felt like a tomb. Every room was a reminder of what we once had, of what I had destroyed. I would wake up in the morning, expecting to hear Laura in the kitchen, to feel the routine of our life. Even in its fractured state. But the house remained silent. She was gone, and it was exactly what I had wanted, yet it was unbearable. I threw myself into distractions. I went to the gym every day, pushing myself harder than ever. But no matter how many miles I ran or how much weight I lifted, it didn't ease the ache that gnawed at me. The familiar faces at the gym didn't help either. Everyone had heard about what happened. People either avoided me or gave me awkward looks of pity, as if they couldn't quite decide if I was the victim or the villain. Maybe I was both. One night, after another sleepless stretch, I found myself staring at the wall of photos in our living room. They were still up, pictures from our wedding, from vacations we'd taken together. It was strange how those moments, once so full of life, now felt distant, like they belonged to another couple entirely. The smiling faces in those pictures seemed like ghosts, mocking me for what I had done. I walked over to the wall, my hand brushing over the glass of one of the frames. It was a photo from our first trip to the beach, just a few months after we'd gotten married. Laura was laughing in the picture, her hair blowing in the wind, her eyes bright with happiness. I couldn't remember the last time I had seen her like that. The anger I had felt, the fury that had driven me to tear her life apart, seemed to fade in that moment. In its place was a deep, aching regret. I had been so consumed by my need for revenge that I hadn't stopped to think about what it would cost me. I had destroyed her life, yes, but in the process, I had destroyed a part of myself too. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, staring at those photos, replaying every moment of our marriage in my mind. The good times, the bad times, the betrayal, it all blurred together until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. All I knew was that I had lost something that could never be replaced. In the morning, I made a decision. I grabbed a box from the closet and began taking the photos down. one by one. I couldn't bear to look at them anymore, but I couldn't throw them away either. They were a part of my past, a part of who I was, and no matter how much I wished I could erase them, they would always be there. As I packed the last photo into the box, I felt a strange sense of finality. It wasn't closure, not really. The pain was still there, the regret still gnawing at me. But it was a step. A small step toward something. Toward living with the aftermath of what I had done. I sat down on the couch, staring at the empty walls, wondering what came next. There was no fixing the past. There was no going back to who I had been before all of this happened. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way to move forward. I didn't know what that looked like yet. I didn't know if I could ever forgive myself for what I had done, or if I even deserved forgiveness. But for the first time in a long time, I was willing to try. It took a long time to figure out what moving forward even meant. I wasn't sure how to live in the ruins of my own making. Laura was gone, and I had no idea where she was. I didn't reach out to her again after that night at her apartment. I knew it wouldn't matter. Whatever connection we had was severed beyond repair. But the silence she left behind haunted me. I tried to fill my days with as much activity as possible. My work, which had once felt like an escape, now became another burden. I would sit at my desk, going through the motions, but my mind was always somewhere else. Lost in the wreckage of my decisions. No amount of meetings or projects could pull me out of the fog that had settled over me. Friends stopped calling. At first, they had tried to offer support, asking how I was doing, and if I needed anything. But as the weeks turned into months, they drifted away. I couldn't blame them. I wasn't the same person anymore, and they could feel it. The social circles Laura and I used to navigate together no longer welcomed me. People talked, about her, about me, about what I had done. The pitying looks turned into whispers, and soon, the invitations stopped coming altogether. In the emptiness, I turned inward. The anger that had once fueled me was gone, replaced by a dull, constant ache. I found myself thinking more and more about the night I had discovered Laura's betrayal, the moment that had set everything in motion. I had convinced myself that what I had done was justified, that I was in the right. But now, I wasn't so sure. What was I left with? A hollow victory and the ruins of a life I couldn't put back together. One evening, I found myself back at the old gym. It was late, nearly closing time, and the place was almost empty. I didn't know why I had gone there. Maybe out of some masochistic desire to revisit the place where everything had started. Jackson, of course, was long gone. His career was ruined, and his name was tarnished. But his presence lingered in every corner of that gym. I stood there for a long time, staring at the punching bag, remembering the rage I had felt when I first discovered the affair. It had been so easy to hate him, to blame him for everything that had gone wrong. But now, in the cold light of everything that had happened, I couldn't escape the truth. Jackson hadn't been the only one responsible. Laura had made her choice, yes, but so had I. I hit the bag, letting the impact reverberate through my body. Each punch felt weaker than the last until I was just standing there, my hands aching, my chest heaving with the weight of everything I had carried for so long. It wasn't anger anymore. It was regret. A few days later, I received an unexpected message. It was from Jackson. I stared at the notification on my phone for a long time, my heart racing, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. I hadn't heard from him since everything had gone down. He had vanished from my life as completely as Laura had. And now, after all this time, he was reaching out. The message was short, almost painfully simple: we need to talk. My first instinct was to ignore it. What could we possibly have to talk about? I had destroyed him, publicly, professionally, and personally. There was nothing left to say. But something inside me, something I couldn't quite name, pushed me to respond. We agreed to meet at a small, out-of-the-way cafe across town. It wasn't a place either of us had ever been before, and that seemed fitting. Neutral ground, away from the wreckage of what had happened. When I arrived, Jackson was already there, sitting in the corner, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked different, older, more tired. The cocky confidence he had once carried was gone, replaced by a quiet resignation. I sat down across from him, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. "I didn't think you'd come," he finally said, his voice low. "I almost didn't," I admitted, folding my hands on the table. "What do you want?" He looked at me, his eyes searching my face for something I wasn't sure he'd find. "I've had a lot of time to think about what happened. About what I did. And I'm sorry," he said, the words coming out with surprising sincerity. I know that doesn't change anything. I know it doesn't make up for what I did to you. But I needed to say it. I didn't know how to respond to that. I had spent so long hating him, blaming him for everything that had gone wrong. Hearing him apologize, hearing him take responsibility, felt strange. It wasn't the apology I had wanted back when everything fell apart. But now that I had it, I didn't know what to do with it. I'm sorry too, I said, the words leaving my mouth before I could stop them. For what I did to you. I went too far. Jackson nodded, his expression softening slightly. Yeah, you did. We sat in silence for a while after that, the weight of our shared history hanging between us. It was strange, sitting across from the man who had once been the focus of all my rage, the man whose life I had so thoroughly destroyed. But in that moment, the anger was gone. All that was left was two broken men, both victims of the same toxic cycle. I lost everything, Jackson said quietly, staring down at his coffee. My job, my reputation, my friends. Everything. I know, I said, my voice hollow. I made sure of that. He looked up at me, his eyes hard but not angry. Why? I didn't have an answer. Or maybe I did, but I wasn't ready to face it. I don't know. We didn't talk much after that. There wasn't much left to say. We sat there for a while longer. Two men who had destroyed each other's lives in different ways, neither of us sure how to move forward. When we finally stood to leave, Jackson looked at me one last time. I'm leaving town. For good this time. I nodded. Good luck. Same to you. And with that, he walked out of the cafe, and out of my life for what I hoped would be the last time. As I sat there alone, staring at the empty seat across from me, I realized something. Revenge had given me nothing but emptiness. The satisfaction I had once felt was long gone, replaced by regret and the hollow knowledge that I had destroyed not only Laura and Jackson but myself. And now, there was no one left to blame. Only me. In the days after meeting Jackson, the realization of everything I had done settled in like a weight that wouldn't lift. I had made peace with the fact that my revenge had destroyed his life, but the consequences hadn't stopped there. The fallout had rippled outward, infecting everything and everyone around me, including myself. I couldn't stop thinking about that last question Jackson had asked me. Why? He deserved to know, and so did I. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't have an answer that made sense anymore. I had told myself I was justified, that Laura's betrayal had given me the right to ruin her and Jackson. It had been about justice, about making them feel the pain I felt. But sitting in the aftermath, the emptiness of that excuse echoed louder than ever. What had I really been seeking? Justice, or something darker, an outlet for the anger I wasn't willing to face within myself? I had lost control of my own life, my marriage, my emotions. Instead of confronting that, I had found a way to shift the blame, to turn my pain into a weapon. But now, the weapon was gone, and all I was left with was the wreckage. The victory I had once tasted felt poisoned. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. The walls closed in on me every day. The memories of what Laura and I had once built there now felt like ghosts, haunting me at every turn. I had packed up the photos, but the echoes of our life together still lingered. The couch we had spent lazy Sunday mornings on, the bed we had once shared, all of it felt like a cruel reminder of what I had torn apart. One morning, after yet another night of restless sleep, I made a decision. I needed to leave, not just the house but the city, the life I had been holding onto so tightly. I had thought my revenge would give me a sense of closure, but all it had done was lock me in a prison of my own making. I needed to let go, to break free of the cycle I had trapped myself in. I spent the next few days putting the house up for sale. I didn't want anything from it, just enough to start over somewhere new. Somewhere far away from the memories of Laura and Jackson, from the people who still whispered about what I had done. I didn't care where I went, as long as it wasn't here. I avoided telling anyone my plans. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. The few friends who had stuck around after everything had already drifted far enough that I didn't feel the need to say goodbye. It felt like I had been living in the shadow of my revenge for so long that no one really knew me anymore, not even myself. On the last day in the house, I stood in the empty living room, the walls stripped bare of anything that resembled the life Laura and I had built. It was strange, seeing it like this, so clean, so empty, so devoid of the chaos that had consumed me for so long. It felt like a chapter closing, but not with the satisfaction I had once craved. More like an exhausted, defeated sigh. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel like I had won anything. But maybe that was the point. Maybe there was no winning in a situation like this, only surviving. As I locked the door for the last time, I felt a small flicker of something I hadn't felt in months: hope. Not for redemption, not for forgiveness, but for something simpler, a chance to start over. A chance to rebuild, away from the ashes of my old life. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what came next. But for the first time in a long time, I was ready to find out. It was a small town, far enough from the city to feel like another world. I'd picked it on a whim, a dot on the map that seemed remote and disconnected from the life I was leaving behind. There was no grand plan, just a desire to get away, to escape the memories that had haunted me for too long. The house I found was modest, nothing like the one Laura and I had shared. It wasn't big, wasn't full of the ghosts of a failed marriage or a life built on lies. It was a blank slate, and that was what I needed. I bought it with what was left of the money from selling the old house, packed what little I had left, and drove out here with no intention of looking back. The town itself was quiet, the kind of place where people knew each other's names but didn't pry. That was perfect for me. I wasn't looking to make new friends, to explain why I had suddenly shown up in their world. I just wanted to disappear, to blend in, and let time wash away the parts of me that still hurt. The first few weeks were strange. There was no Laura here, no reminders of the life I'd left behind. I had spent so long living with the consequences of my revenge that I almost didn't know how to function without them. The silence wasn't painful, though, it was freeing. I picked up odd jobs around town to keep myself busy, working with my hands and fixing things. It felt good to be doing something real, something that had nothing to do with the betrayal, the anger, or the lies. The work was simple, and for the first time in months, my mind wasn't spinning with regrets or second guesses. I wasn't chasing anything anymore, not revenge, not redemption. I was just living. One afternoon, while fixing a fence for an older couple on the outskirts of town, I found myself looking out over the open fields that stretched far beyond their property. The wind blew gently, the sky wide and blue, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt something close to peace. That night, as I sat on the porch of my new home, watching the sun sink below the horizon, I realized something. I had spent so much of my life chasing control, trying to shape the world around me to fit my idea of justice. But in doing so, I had only lost control of myself. In my quest for revenge, I had let anger define me, let it twist me into someone I barely recognized. But now, in this small town, with no one to answer to and no past weighing me down, I could finally breathe. I wasn't free of the mistakes I had made, or of the people I had hurt. But I was free of the need to keep justifying them to myself. I would never forget Laura, and I knew I would always carry the weight of what I had done to her and Jackson. There were no do-overs, no way to rewrite the choices that had brought me here. But that was okay. Life wasn't about erasing the past, it was about learning how to live with it. As the days turned into weeks, I slowly began to rebuild. Not the life I had lost, but something new, something different. I found small pleasures in the mundane: morning coffee on the porch, the feel of dirt under my hands as I worked in the garden, and the quiet of a town where no one knew my story. It wasn't happiness, not yet, but it was something close. One day, maybe, I would reach out to Laura. Not to apologize again or to ask for forgiveness, but just to let her know that I had found peace. I wasn't there yet, though. There were still too many pieces of myself that needed to heal. For now, this was enough. In the end, revenge had taken me down a dark, twisted path. One that left scars on my heart and soul. But it hadn't broken me. I had survived it, and in doing so, I had found a way to let go of the anger that had consumed me. As the last of the sunlight disappeared and the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, I smiled a small, honest smile. For the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could move forward. It was time to leave the past behind.